that doesn't exist in most European countries.
Although while we're getting to people, the interesting thing is that in Italy and Spain and Germany and France, they have a system of mutuelles. So the first basic amount of benefits is provided by the government, and then the supplemental part is private. So I actually think we're probably just going to start going the way of Canada, France, Germany, Singapore, Switzerland. It's like we're not going to reinvent the wheel. We're going to figure out what works.
Sandra Gold from the Arnold Gold Foundation. My question was triggered because the not-for-profit world has never managed to get health care for its employees to date. And so that might trigger some bold thinker who might take some action before Obama's new plans will come in. But the question...
We cover freelancers' health insurance in the nonprofit sector, just FYI.
So it triggered the question of how much do you think that the funder world ought to be asking for words that we've heard in the past here, which are models for replication, which could be shared and replicated. And also, we didn't hear much just in passing about evaluation and measurement. And are you thinking about social accountability measures that might be helpful to the funders?
So on the evaluation point, at least from our approach, what we've actually decided proactively is that in 9 out of 10 cases, we're going to measure outputs rather than outcomes, because if you make $1 million investment and it's going to cost you $300,000 to understand outcomes, unless someone's going to fund you specifically for that. And I don't mean to be sarcastic about it, because in actual fact, in some cases, we have funders who do. The Gates Foundation launched our water portfolio and said 2/3 is to invest and 1/3 is to understand the impact. We have launched together something called the Pulse system. It's basically a system that we were using to manage social, operational, and financial outcomes of our companies, and are trying to now, we have 50 nonprofits who have come together, as well as a number of funders, so that may well be a platform for other organizations like ours to do this measurement, so that there could be a platform for output measurement in this field, so everybody doesn't have to be replicating this. But I think, again, there's a question that we ask every time. If we know for a fact that an anti-malarial bed net does X, then we just care about delivering those nets. If we don't know, for example, that a community water system, what happens if you drink 4 times in the day from that clean water and 1 time from unclean water, does that intervention actually work? And the water community doesn't actually know the answer to that question. So when we find situations like that, we try to go out and fund it and find the answers. But it is this balancing act, because the standard expectation of monitoring and evaluation is something that we just feel like we can't do efficiently.
Hi, Mark Chess. I'm actually on the board of Present Tense, and want to just share how exciting it is as a funder to be involved with innovation, and how inspiring it's been for me to hear from all of the 4 panelists what you're all doing. Sitting back, I'm also actually from venture capital, and as a venture capitalist, we adapted, we innovated. Our fund innovated, and we moved to later stage financing. Then we moved to China, because we saw that's where the market was going. But one thing we learned in China is that China starves innovation. They don't have a culture of innovation. And when I sat back in the audience and I was thinking that many of the foundations here, I'm guessing, might not necessarily have a culture of innovation. And one thing I learned as an investor is it's hard to go into China and say innovate. But it's good to go into China and say we can bring innovation, we can meet you part way, and we can invest in a model that works together. You share your resources, we share our resources. My question to the panel is, when we sit in a room of foundation professionals, foundations that have been used to a certain culture, where does innovation meet culture within a foundation? How should foundations be thinking about innovation? Because innovation, as an investor, I can tell you innovation for its own self is not worth much. Innovation is only worthwhile if it leads to adaptation, to solutions that grow. So my question is, are we really talking about foundations innovating, or are we talking about foundations adapting? You mentioned adapting earlier, to the challenges, and learning from innovators about how to make this work. Where did these cross? How can we cross paths with all of you and where you are going as funders?
I have, maybe you should go first and then I'll.
I feel, okay, I will. I actually want to go back to the name of the session in terms of smart choices. I think that back to what Ruth was saying in terms of, there are existing organizations out there that have massive impact, and how do we sustain them over time. I think that one of the things that we've at least adapted to in terms of seeing the culture that's out there is that it's not enough to ask, it's not right to ask a foundation to try to sponsor something that they've never encountered. It seems much better to say, well, we can help you have the impact that you want to have by starting a venture that solves a problem more efficiently. In terms of the issue of accountability, therefore, you would expect that the funder knows the field. The funder has been involved in the field and has learned it over the years. In doing so, they have the sense that the outputs lead to certain outcomes. And knowing new ideas for their value and the outputs for their opportunity for outcomes, and then kind of taking a merger and acquisition model and thinking about how to take young ideas and young ventures and merge them into organizations that already exist could possibly be a bridge for shifting the culture. That is, I think that if funders start to look at the kind of the hotbeds. I mean, look at what happened in Israel, at least in the 1990s and then later. Israel realized that by creating greenhouses, by creating chabamot, it would be able to sponsor the development of a whole lot of new ideas. And at that same time, venture capital firms were able to get financing from individuals who don't have the expertise to raise new ventures. And out of that, we see a boom that has lasted us and strengthened us almost to the present day. So I think that if we can see that partnership between organizations that fund and support and train innovators with those organizations that fund and support certain fields, there could be a wonderful way to work together.
There's that saying, life is short and life is long. And I think that there's something about the idea, forgive, that venture capitalists are like the engine of innovation, like as if we should all think they're like number one in the race. I think that's ahistorical. And I think that if you look and see, right now in terms of microfinance, like look at what happened with microfinance. Well, microfinance, it was because there was a decade of funding of organizations like Grameen Bank, groups that were on the ground building, for year in and year out. And then venture capital came in for like a moment in time and infused a ton of capital, which made the field grow. And that, to me, is the ecosystem that we're talking about. And so, sometimes I think like the era of this kind of slavish devotion to the hardcore part of capital is like over, and that we should be looking at this wide range. Another example of that would be San Francisco. You didn't have Silicon Valley that just grew out because a bunch of smart venture capitalists came. You had it because California invested in their educational system, and you had so many people who were like hanging out in bars and trading and talking and loving their field and having the time to have like lots of time in getting their PhDs and cross-fertilization, and then the venture capitalists came in for that moment in time and moved it along. So I think we really have to be looking at this, because if we think it's all ideological one way or the other, we're just wrong. It's a full spectrum, and that we should be thinking of these things as tools. So I just think really I just think we often in the philanthropic world, we go to meetings, and the people who, and with all due respect, because you seem like a wonderful person, so I don't mean this in any way to you, but people get, well, I'm a venture capitalist from blah, 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 so, oh, you must be right because you are in a hedge fund world or a private equity. I think part of this is having some confidence. Nonprofit people, we're smart, we know what we're doing, just as smart. We all have to prove our intelligence, have the integrity of our ideas, but I for one see it as one moment in a long range of activity.
I hate to do this. I know there are many other questions. For those who have questions that are still persisting, please come up and talk. Sorry, I'm going to beg you all to stay for a couple more minutes. Come up and talk to our panelists. And on that note, I thank you very much for your attention, your participation, and have a great conference.